Everyone loves a June garden. Fresh growth, cool weather, everything looks full of promise. August is where the garden becomes honest. This is the time of the year when you find out what actually likes your garden and what only looks good when the weather is cooperating. Today, I'm going to walk through what's thriving, what's struggling, and what I actually do instead of trying to make everything look perfect again. So let's start with the bad news, the things that aren't thriving. Some containers are looking rough. A few of them have reached the end of what they were intended to do. Most of these containers were planted to provide color early in the season before the rest of the garden filled in. They did that job. Now that the landscape is fuller, I don't need every pot to be a major focal point. I can either refresh them or remove them, and no one will even remember that they were here. There are seedlings that didn't make it. Some were eaten, some dried out. Some simply never had a chance once the larger plants around them took over. The eucalyptus is technically still here, but it's been completely covered by other plants around it. Some of the perennials are just finished for the year. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with them. They bloomed, they looked beautiful, and now their season is over. Others are clearly unhappy in their current home. Maybe they're getting too much sun, too little water, or more competition than I had expected. August makes those problems much easier to see. And then there's storm damage. The cosmos were hit especially hard. They're tall, a little floppy to begin with, and the storm pushed several of them over. It looks dramatic now, but it does not necessarily mean the plant is done. A good cutback should help them recover enough for a fresh flush of growth. Fortunately, plenty of the garden is still doing exactly what I needed to do. So what's thriving? The Rudbeckia is having a moment. This is one of the reasons why I want more plants that peak later in the season. When some of the earlier flowers are fading, Rudbeckia steps in and keeps the beds looking alive. The impatiens are also doing beautifully. They may not be unusual, but they consistently perform well in my yard. They handle shade, they fill the space quickly, and provide reliable color. There is value in knowing what ordinary plants work extraordinarily well for you. The zinnias are taking off right now, especially when everything else is starting to struggle. That timing makes them incredibly useful. They're bright, fresh color, height, and energy to the garden during a period when lots of the other plants are becoming tired. The Joe Pye weed is also thriving. It has height and presence of a shrub, but it's covered with flowers and pollinators, and it looks completely at home in the heat. The annuals planted directly in the flower beds are doing much better than some of the annuals in containers. Their roots have more room, the soil holds more moisture longer, and they blend into the rest of the landscape rather than having to carry an entire display on their own. And while shrubs are not necessarily the most exciting thing in the garden right now, they're doing some very important work. They create shape, separation, and structure. Even when the flowers are having an awkward week, the shrubs keep the garden from looking completely chaotic. I actually think August may be the most informative month of the garden. So what does August teach you? June shows you possibilities. August shows you reality. For example, the shaded areas in my garden still look lush. The hostas are full. The native plants are comfortable. Even without constant flowers, this space feels green and layered. That tells me my plant combination is working. It also tells me my drip system is finally dialed in through most of these areas. Where the irrigation is working properly, the difference is obvious. Where it isn't, The garden tells me really quickly. These new plants in the pots have some leaf burn, so that tells me they need more attention while they establish. I may not need to water the entire garden more, but these plants specifically need more help. Zinnias are taking off right now, where other plants are starting to decline. That tells me they're not just pretty, they're filling an important seasonal gap. Look at them, they're covered in pollinators. I also noticed that I would like more blue flowers in the garden at this time. I have balloon flowers blooming in the front, but that's about it. There's a lot of yellow, pink, purple, and green, but not very much true blue. That's something I can write down and plan for next year instead of vaguely feeling like something's missing. The new pots in the backyard are also adding structure. Even when the plants inside of them aren't perfect, the shape and the placement of those containers help to define the space. The side yard still needs a lot of work, but the juniper and the bistro set are giving it a starting point. It's not finished, but it still feels intentional and lush with these annuals, so I can start to imagine what comes next. When I look around the garden right now, the natives, the hostas, cannas, zinnias, and junipers are the plants that are doing the most work. August is basically the garden's report card. It tells you what to plant more of, what needs to be moved, and what you can stop spending money on. So how are we going to make the August garden look lovely? First thing I do is I remove the bad. I'm not trying to rescue every leaf. Sometimes the fastest way to improve the garden is simply to cut something back, pull something out, or admit that the season's over. The cosmos that were damaged by the storm, I'm cutting them back. They may look smaller for a while, but removing the broken and floppy growth helps them to recover. The calla lilies are finished blooming. Their leaves are starting to collapse, so I'm cutting out the worst foliage rather than letting them sit here and look increasingly miserable. I also start cleaning up the containers. I remove spent blooms, cut back anything that's become leggy, and I give the plant some fertilizer to encourage another flush of growth. Not every container will recover perfectly, but most of them can look significantly better with 10 minutes of attention. I'm also cutting back the spent hosta blooms. The leaves still look great, but the stalks are finished, and removing them immediately makes the whole area feel cleaner. And this coreopsis looks unusually gray and tired. It doesn't typically look like this, so I'm going to cut it back rather than stare at it another month and hope it improves on its own. I also like to plant something new. The next fix to plant something that makes you excited for the rest of the season. I'm planting another round of sunflowers. The season is temporary and not every plant works. That doesn't mean the season is over, and it also doesn't mean that you failed. It just means you get another chance to plant something. I also starting up some violas and some dusty millers for my fall arrangements. These may not become the biggest plants in the garden, but they give me something to look forward to and connect the end of the summer to the beginning of fall. There's always another small season coming. I also like to think about fall now. So I start looking back at old pictures of my previous fall containers. I like seeing what combinations worked, what colors I've used in the past, and certain containers looked good in their location. This year I've decided already that I want to do a lot of pumpkins and ornamental cabbage. Fall containers are consistently my favorite, and I'm thinking of using purple and orange as my main color theme. But I also want to think about future fixtures. So larger lesson is that I need more perennials that bloom later in the season. Joe Pye weed and Rebecca are both performing beautiful now. Goldenrod and white snake root and asters are still coming. All of these native plants in my garden and many natives naturally reach their peak later in the summer. Adding more of them would help the garden transition from early summer into fall without any noticeable lulls. I also want to keep using annuals inside my flower beds. Annuals are an insurance policy for flowers and interest. They fill gaps while perennials are getting established. They keep the garden colorful during slow periods. And the side yard is a good example. It looks fairly full right now, but much of that fullness is coming from annuals. I haven't committed to a final design yet, and these annuals give me time to make those decisions without leaving the bed empty. I also need to continue repeating the plants that have proven themselves. Vines on the hill work, impatiens work, petunias work, zinnias work. And the second planting of sunflowers gives me later than a single spring planting would. Repeating a plant doesn't have to be boring. I can change the color, the variety, or the placement while still relying on the plant I already know performs well here. Finally, I need to keep building the bones of the garden. Many of my evergreens are still small, but they are growing. I like arranging evergreens in groups, so during the winter, your eye immediately travels to those focal points. The single evergreen can disappear in a large landscape, but the collection makes them read a structure. They may not be the showiest plants in August, but they are the foundation that keeps the garden looking full when flowers are gone. Every garden has an awkward season. The goal isn't to prevent damaged leaves, failed seedlings, or empty patches. The goal is to notice what the garden is telling you. August tells me where watering is working, which plants can handle the heat, where I need more late season color, and which plants have earned their place in the garden next year. So I'm cutting back what looks bad, planting a few things that bring me joy, and making notes for the future. The garden doesn't have to look like June forever. June is full of promise, August is full of information. And that information is what makes next year's garden even better. Thanks for joining me.